Alright, all you glorious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayersToo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure to the show. And while you're over there as well, if you could leave us a review, it just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. It genuinely does mean a lot, and you are all legends to us. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
It's going very well, Mark. Good to see you again. Good to be here as always. How you doing?
I am doing fantastic. I am very happy to be not working and now here talking to you.
Is work still a bit of a misery for you just now?
Oh yeah, just absolutely dreadful.
I finally feel like I've hit the stride a bit again, like after a couple of post-Christmas weeks of just not understanding what my job was anymore. Back on form, I think.
Oh well, that's good. I'm happy for you. Anyway, Liz, nobody cares about this. Nobody cares about this nonsense. What have you been playing this week?
Well, Mark, last week I mentioned that I had made a start on Call of the Sea, the first-person puzzle game, which has just recently come to Xbox Game Pass. And over the last week, I've finished that now. Honestly, final thoughts, it's kind of fine. It's got some really decent puzzles in it, if you're interested in that. If you've played The Witness, which again and again comes back to me as the most obvious comparison, just because it is a first-person, story-driven, logic-based puzzle game. The Witness is just better overall. It's longer, it's got much more challenging, much harder puzzles, whereas Call of the Sea feels to me often that it's got a good idea behind a lot of the challenges it presents to you, and some of them, one puzzle in particular, was a real head-scratcher when I played it. You know, I was sat for a while trying to get my head around the logic of it all, but by and large it's manageable, it's not overly challenging, and it's set in a really beautiful game world, this lush kind of South Pacific island. But the story, I just felt it was a bit light, to be honest. I'm kind of surprised at myself saying that, because going into it I thought the story was going to be the main thing, but it doesn't really set up much that I found wasn't pretty clear where it was going to go right from the beginning, or indeed anything that felt all that kind of new and original, if I'm totally honest. And I think, as I said when I first started talking about it last week, the way that some of the narration is delivered, there's so much exposition from the lead character, the player character, who is almost constantly talking about something or other that's happening on screen when it's all pretty clear.
Really
what's
beating you over the head with it.
Yeah,
sort of thing.
Exactly that. And you said last week to me it sounded like the developers just didn't really trust that the player knew what was happening, and that
sounds like
that really stuck with me, because after you said that I still had about half the game to play, and honestly that's exactly what it feels like. It almost feels like in the kind of cinema world where there's a test screening and notes come back to the company saying actually no one laughed at this bit, so you have to explain what the joke is. You know, it feels a bit like that at times, where they've had some test players who have just been like, oh, I have no idea what's going on, and they've just really made it too obvious. It made a lot of it quite hard to enjoy for me, to be totally honest, at times. That sounds super negative. I mean, it's totally fine. If you've got Game Pass and you're interested in puzzle games, give it a bash. It's only about 6 or 8 hours long, if you're paying for your subscription, it's right there for you. But I wouldn't be rushing out to buy it if I was otherwise not engaged in Game Pass, basically.
Fair enough, man. That's a bit disappointing, to be honest. I must admit, when the reviews came in for the game, I thought it might have reviewed higher than it actually did, and then burrowing into the reviews a little bit, I think what you're saying rings true in a lot of them as well, in that the puzzles, for being a puzzle game, weren't very challenging at all. Do you know what I mean? It's alright having puzzles like that in like a big RPG or whatever, if it was like a Tomb Raider game and the puzzles are relatively straightforward and it's just a little puzzle as a means from getting to A to B, you know what I mean? But if that is the crux of your game, is those puzzles, and your player character is spouting exposition at you, telling you thing by thing by thing that you should be looking at on the screen, it's sort of like, well, you're removing all my intuition, you're removing my agency from this puzzle.
Yeah.
That's not what it's all about, is it? Let's be honest.
Absolutely not. And it's just when that starts to overlap as well with story detail, that you're watching it just going like, this isn't a complicated story. I'm following this. You really don't need to be ramming this stuff home, you know? So, but yeah, not the best, but as I say, worth a go. And just very quickly, speaking of story games, I have subsequently to that started playing another game which is available on Xbox Game Pass, which is Don't Nods Tell Me Why.
Nice.
Yeah, which came out last year, I think last summer. It came out in 3 episodes, or 3 chapters as they call them. And this is the game that, if anyone thinks, oh, I think I've heard of that, it was thought to be at least the first game with a playable trans character as the kind of lead, and certainly that's the character I've been playing mostly so far.
Yeah, I think that it was the first like big studio game that you could play as a trans character. I mean, I'm sure there's 1,000 games on itch.io that you can play as trans characters, but this was like the first big game that you could do that. Absolutely, which is a big deal, you know?
Yeah, and it's also, you know, largely a trans narrative again so far, and as much as I've played, I've basically played the first chapter so far, and so I'll save most of my thoughts until I've played more of it, because it basically is its story and I don't want to give anything away kind of until I'm a bit further along in it. So far, so don't nod, basically, is what I would say. It feels very much like Life is Strange, both in terms of its story and how it tells that story, and also in terms of the mechanics. It's got a very slight supernatural element to it, again, which I'll explain in detail another time, but so far I'm enjoying it, but you know, it's nothing groundbreaking to me at all.
Oh, fair enough. That's interesting as well. I must admit, Tell Me Why is something I reckon I'll need to get around to at some point as well. I've really enjoyed the Life is Strange games. I've played all the Life is Strange games, so yeah, it's definitely one for me as well.
Nice one. And what have you been playing this week?
Well, Lewis, I have continued to play Persona 5. I'm now 20 hours into the game. The game has a very convenient in-game timer, so I know exactly how long I've played, and I still feel as if I have barely scratched the fucking surface. The game is still introducing new stuff to me. I got introduced to a whole new thing last night. I was just like, alright, so we're still doing new stuff, right, that's fine. The story, Lewis, is absolutely batshit crazy stupid in only the way that a JRPG can be, but is somehow really still quite endearing. I don't really know why, to be honest, but actually this is a sort of similar response I have to a lot of anime TV series and things like that I watch, that is like, man, this is absolutely ludicrous, but I want to know what happens next. I always want to know what happens next. I want to watch the next episode, and it's sort of a similar thing with Persona 5, to be completely honest with you. And there is actual anime sections of the game as well. Like, there are proper like anime cutscenes in it and whatever.
Nice.
The combat is very JRPG turn-based combat, to the point that there is very, very little to say about it. The difference here being that you can persuade enemies to come across and, quotes, lend you their power, and they will become one of your personas, and you sort of use them in battle. It's basically as a weapon, effectively. That's sort of how you can think of them. People say that this is like a Pokemon-esque element to the game, but I mean, it is the bare bonesest of Pokemon elements, in that you can collect a certain amount of these personas and whatever throughout the game. But I mean, really, if you're going into this thinking that this is in any way like Pokemon, it is certainly not. The game also does something that I wouldn't say necessarily annoys me, but it is definitely something that I've noticed. There's definitely a lot of dicking around in this game, and is artificially slow, I would say.
Right.
This is something that Death Stranding had. This is something that Red Dead Redemption 2 had, where just animations and moving around and going from place A to place B, it's just a slow process. Do you know what I mean? Like, the animations could be much quicker, but they're not. Things like that don't necessarily annoy me, and they didn't annoy me in Death Stranding or in Red Dead Redemption 2. It was just part of what the game was. But it does feel as though sometimes you sit down to play this game, 4 hours have passed, you've done quite a lot, but the story is not moved, like, at all.
Yeah.
But despite that, you know as well that everything that you were doing was necessary. It's not as if you were dicking around doing things that weren't necessary. You were dicking around doing things that you have to do. It just takes a long time to do them, you know? I don't know if that's a compliment or not. It's not a negative for me, I have to admit. Like, genuinely, it's not. I don't know if that sounded negative, but it's really not a negative to me. It's just a very slowly paced game, basically. It goes very slowly. But one thing that I will just keep coming back to is that the art style in this game is just incredible. It's so good to see a game of this size, which is like a relatively big game, I would say. It's definitely AAA, I would class this as.
Yeah.
Lean heavily into an art style like that, you know, in the way that like an indie game might. It's so rare to see that on the AAA sized game, and it just works. It just works on every single level. But there are two things that I've now learned from playing Persona for 20 hours less. One is that because the game moves at such an unbelievably slow pace, it's going to be fucking terrible to talk about on this podcast. Like, it really, really is. I'm just going to come onto the podcast next week and it's just going to be like, yep, still Persona.
Another 10 hours done.
Nothing much has changed. It's still the same game. And two, if you ask me right now why I like Persona 5, and I do really like Persona 5, by the way, I find myself thinking about it and wanting to go back and play it. I don't have a good answer to that question. Like, I really don't. I would not necessarily recommend this game to nearly anyone unless they were into JRPGs particularly. But if you are and you like that sort of thing, which I do, and I really enjoy turn-based combat and whatever, it's really good. Like, it is actually really good. I just can't really put my finger on why, because there are so many things in this game that I can see being infuriating to a great many gamers out there. But to me, it all just works. It all just works nicely. It just does.
Yeah. It sounds like something that just comes down to personal taste then, in terms of how much of that slow motion you can bear, or how interested in turn-based combat and things like that you are. Out of all of the kind of elements of it, what is keeping you there? Is it the story? Is it the combat? Is it the, you know, the art style and the world, that kind of stuff?
It's sort of all of it, I suppose. Like, that's what I'm saying. It all just works. It all just clicks together, you know? So the game's basically split into combat sections and being a high schooler sections. But honestly, like, some of the high school sections are actually quite good, and they are the more story-focused sections. They are the sections where you would build your relationship with other characters and whatever, and then the combat sections are obviously combat-focused. And they do play together quite well in a sort of Fire Emblem Three Houses sort of way. There was a lot of this going on as well, and I very much enjoyed the school portion of that as well. I don't know, like, I think if you like this sort of game, this is a really great game for it. I don't particularly know why, because there's a lot of it that's just like, I mean, the story is fucking nonsense. Like, it is absolutely batshit insane. Like, it really is off the wall crazy, honestly. But if you like this sort of game, like, this is really good. Like, it's really, really good. I would highly recommend it if you like JRPGs. But if you don't, Jesus Christ, this is the most JRPG there might ever be in the world, and steer well clear.
I think I know which side of that line I'm on.
Oh, I do too, Lewis. You should never play this game, to be clear. All right, ladies and gentlemen, on to the news. All right, news item number 1. CD Projekt's CEO and co-founder Marcin Iwiński has made an apology video over the launch of Cyberpunk 2077, particularly around the PS4 and Xbox One versions of the game. In the video, Iwiński said Cyberpunk 2077 did not meet the quality standards we wanted to meet. No shit springs to mind there. I should hope not. Jesus, if that was your quality standards. He also stressed not to blame the devs, who he described as incredibly hardworking and talented, and he also said that he and the board had the final say and that it was their call to release the game when they did. So that all sounds pretty good so far, Lewis, and it would have been a great statement and video if he'd just shut up there. But he did not. He said a whole bunch of other things, which I am going to call bullshit on pretty regularly here. He said their testing did not show a big part of the issues you experienced. Now, keep in mind that the English is this man's second language, but what he's essentially saying here is that the issues that came up on the PS4 and Xbox One versions didn't come up in their testing. A lot of people have jumped on this line as basically blaming the QA, which, to be honest with you, I think is a completely justifiable way of looking at that statement. But considering the state of the game on PS4 and Xbox One in particular, which was just so incredibly bad for a AAA game, it is impossible for me to believe that they did not know what state that game was in. It was a shambles in those consoles, Lewis. You only had to play the game for a few hours to know that game was awful, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree with you there, Mark. It's not believable to me in the slightest that the QA team did not pick up on this, because, yeah, like
absolutely
you say,
fucking not. Jesus Christ.
Every single player who has subsequently received the game and played it, I mean, you just have to take a quick glance on YouTube to see the myriad bugs and glitches that would have been utterly apparent, definitely to a professional QA team, but to the most amateur gamer can see them instantly. And obviously reviewers did pick out a lot of the bugs in the PC build, so yeah, there's just not a chance that they didn't know about these in advance. It seems to me that they chose not to know them, or they decided that they were fixable and just went ahead anyway.
Either they knew about them and ignored them, or knew about them and through hubris, I suppose, decided that they could fix them in time.
Yeah.
But there's no way that they did not know about these issues. I'm sorry, I simply do not believe that. He also addressed the fact that the console review codes were only sent out 2 days before the game's release, meaning that no one had a chance to review the game on console before launch. He says that they were, quotes, fighting for quality on old consoles until the very last moment, and every extra day of working on the day zero update brought visible improvements. Basically meaning that the console codes were sent out later than they had originally planned. Again, quotes from him. But, I mean, does he think that we're daft here? I don't dispute, right, that devs can get a lot done in only a few days, particularly because we know that they were crunching through this as well. But to make so much of a change over just, 3 or 4 days, was it? To make such a significant change that it was worth leaving your fans and your customers in the dark about the quality of the game on the console, that simply isn't true. I mean, that trade-off should never have happened, ever. It seems to me that this was simply done to keep games journalists from doing their job, which is to keep us informed so that we can make informed decisions about the games that we are purchasing. Instead, they relied on their enormous, overblown 8-year marketing campaign to sell you the game and removed the voice of trusted people in the industry who could tell you how the game actually plays from first-hand experience. This compounded, I think, with the fact that the other CEO, Adam Kavinsky, told everyone that Cyberpunk played, quotes, surprisingly well on last-gen hardware, when he must have known, he absolutely must have known, that the game ran like shit on those old consoles. And quite frankly, I think that tells you everything that you need to know. They were actively trying to conceal reviews of this game, and actively lied about the quality of this game so that you bought the game day one. And Adam Kavinsky's comments weren't addressed in the apology either. And the final thing I just want to say about this is the fucking roadmap, Lewis. Holy shit.
Oh, yeah. Not a good roadmap.
This roadmap might as well have been done in crayon, seriously, for all the fucking use it is. It is absolutely ridiculously bad. He did say that the next major patch would drop sometime in the next 10 days. Couldn't even give us a hard date on that. And then a larger patch is due in the weeks after, so there's no date on that either. This means that the free DLC will come out later in the year, and the next gen upgrade has been moved from the first half of the year to the last half of the year. But not a single date, not even a single month is on the Cyberpunk roadmap. After patch 2.1, there is simply a large block that says multiple updates and improvements for the rest of the year, which, I mean, yeah, obviously that goes for any single video game. Then the free DLC is arbitrarily dropped over the first half of the year. No month, no nothing, just so that it looks as if it's coming in the first half of the year. Then the next gen console update is arbitrarily dropped over the latter half of the year, but it is meaningless. It means absolutely nothing. There's no dates on it. It's literally just a bar that says 2021 and 2022. And there's just nothing in between it of any use.
Yeah. Maybe they learned their lesson about trying to suggest that they could hit dates that are completely not achievable.
Yeah, I don't understand really why they tried to defend themselves to a certain extent, because he basically started this thing by saying, this is all our fault, don't blame the devs. That was all good. And then immediately after that started deflecting a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was just like, what you should have done was just said, don't blame the devs, they worked really, really hard because we fucking made them. And this launch was my fault and the board's fault, and then the video should have stopped. Right? And then that would have been great, that would have been accountability, and then everybody from CDPR should have shut the fuck up, Hello Games style, until it was ready to be relaunched.
Yeah.
Quotes. I am also not convinced at all that next gen version is coming this year at all, because they clearly have so much work to do. And there's also been another article by Jason Schreier, which again we'll link to in the show notes over at PlayersToo.com, and he spoke to multiple devs over at CDPR. Apparently they were saying that they thought that the game should have been released in 2022. The whole game should have been released in 2022, not 2020. So 2 more years of development they thought that game needed. It's wild, Lewis. Absolutely wild.
That is, astonishing that they would say that a full 2-year delay, that is the length of time required to finish a game that had already been in development for years. And that Jason Schreier article, by the way, is superb for anyone who's really interested in this story, because he does speak to a lot of people and brings in a lot of different angles to it, which, one of which is that hubris thing that you mentioned there, where there seemed to just be this attitude within the company that they, like BioWare before them, just kind of have the magic and could turn around this game without simply because of who they are and what they've done. Like, they made The Witcher 3, ergo they can do anything. You know, you mentioned Hello Games there, and their redemption story for No Man's Sky is probably the best redemption story I think that we have.
Oh yeah, from this sort of stuff.
Some other Ubisoft games certainly have kind of turned themselves around, service games and stuff like that.
Siege as well was a big one.
Yeah, but Hello Games did as you said, they did the right thing. They shut up, they focused on fixing the game, they announced things when they had them to announce, and here we are, we're looking at this roadmap nonsense from CDPR.
It's not a roadmap. It's not. I refuse to acknowledge this as a roadmap. It's nothing.
Especially given that they had already said when the two big patches were going to drop, they said that would be, you know, start of the year, January, February, basically.
They said it would be January, February, so there are patch, I think it was 1.1 and 1.2. That is in line with what they previously said, to be fair to them.
No, absolutely. So there's that, which we already knew, and then there's a bunch of stuff in the future. Obviously, that is what was going to happen. That's the only way time moves. So just all of it, it's just mishandled, it's miscommunication. I think you're totally right about that. Pretty grubby way of saying, don't blame the devs, but do blame the QA team. We were kind of blind about this, sorry. Well, it's like that is literally your job, is to make sure that you know what the product you're putting out is. Yeah,
another big thing was that he was admitting that the process of taking the fancy-dancy, shiny PC version and downgrading that such that it would work on a PS4 and an Xbox One, they massively underestimated how long that task was going to take. But as you said, that's their job.
Yeah.
Your job is to do that and do that correctly. And when you fuck up, the answer to that is not release it anyway, it's take more time.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, they still could have released it on PC if they were really desperate for some income for some reason. They could have released
it on PC first.
Exactly.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Do the console port later. I mean, that's not uncommon.
No, it's not uncommon at all. I mean, usually it's the other way around, to be fair. Usually it comes to console, then it comes to PC.
Yeah.
But absolutely, yeah, if it was going to take longer to get a proper version on console, then yeah, absolutely. Because as you said, the PC version came out, it was still riddled with bugs, and don't anyone think that it was anything to the contrary. But at least it was working and it looked good, and textures loaded in within the hour. Things like that, you know?
Yeah.
Oh man, such a mess at CDPR. It's so sad to see as well, because they were such a lauded studio that it's just quite sad to see, do you know what I mean? And I think they're going to have defenders to the end, but really, I do not know how you defend this company anymore. Alright, news item number 2. Ubisoft is making a Star Wars game loose, spelling the end for EA as the lone developer of Star Wars titles. I am not sure quite how this ties into the 10-year agreement between Disney and EA, which was supposed to mean that EA had exclusive rights to AAA Star Wars development. But even though I haven't played a great deal of Ubisoft games, and certainly none that I would say are particularly amazing in the recent past, but I really think that this is amazing news because it opens the doors to all sorts of possibilities lists. Obviously, we discussed last week that Lucasfilm Games had been reborn, and the announcement shortly followed that Bethesda's Machine Games would be making an Indiana Jones game, but this is Star Wars loose, and therefore it matters more. The game will be an open world because it's Ubisoft and that's what they do, and it will be developed by Massive Entertainment, who did The Division and The Division 2, and it will also utilise The Division's Snowdrop engine. When asked about EA's 10-year deal, Disney Games exec Sean Shoptaw said, EA has been and will continue to be a very strategic and important partner for us now and going forward, but we did feel like there was room for others, which I think says a lot, to be honest. Yeah. However, it is quite likely that this game will come out after 2023 anyway, which is when EA's deal runs out, but even the announcement of this, I think, is incredible. But on the subject of EA, a spokesperson gave this statement to Eurogamer.
We are proud of our long-standing collaboration with Lucasfilm Games, which will continue for years to come. Our talented teams have created some of the most successful games in the history of the Star Wars franchise, including Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, Star Wars Battlefront and Battlefront 2, Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, and Star Wars Squadrons. We love Star Wars, and we look forward to creating more exciting experiences for players to enjoy.
So it seems as though the door is definitely not closed for EA, and their franchise will probably continue to go, particularly Fallen Order and particularly Battlefront, I would have thought. But, I mean, this is pretty fucking cool, right? I would love to see this open the floodgates for far more opportunities for other developers, basically. I think this is really cool, and the future is, quite frankly, bright for Star Wars.
Yeah, it was time to get away from EA, certainly. That time passed a little while ago. Honestly, I think it might be a good thing for EA as well, not least because they kind of lose some of that toxicity around not being able to do a good Star Wars game, which, as their own statement says, they have made some good Star Wars games in the latter period of...
Not that many in 10 years, though, right?
No, not that many in 10 years at all, and only a few really good ones in the last year or two, basically. But it might just free them up to focus on what they're actually good at and what they're passionate about making, instead of having that burden of we're the Star Wars guys, But yeah, like you said, man, more generally, the fact that this throws open, this beloved license, which could go in all sorts of different directions to anyone, potentially. I mean, do you read this then like the Marvel Games situation, where we've seen, Insomniac being given a Spider-Man game, we've then seen Square Enix being given the Avengers game, presumably there'll be others in that kind of vein going forward. Is that what you think Lucasfilm Games are going to do from here on in?
I mean, basically, yes. I think that they are trying to do exactly what they did with Marvel Games. They've done that very, very successfully. I mean, you can argue about the success of Marvel's Avengers. Maybe that wasn't great. But I think that this approach is definitely the right approach, even if you don't hit it out of the park every single time,
Yeah.
And very exciting for Star Wars and video games, I think. I think this could be really, really cool. Alright, news item number 3. There's been a bit of a fracas online, Lewis, around the release of Hitman 3 this week. A big part of the appeal of Hitman 3 was that you would be able to play levels from Hitman 1 and 2 should you own those games. However, in the pre-launch guide, IO seemed to suggest that Hitman 2 levels would only be available after purchasing a separate access pack. This was also further complicated as Hitman 3 is an Epic Game Store exclusive, but many, many, many people will have bought Hitman 1 and 2 over on Steam, of course. And there was some fear that they wouldn't be able to transfer their progress over to the new game at all. However, Lewis, Big Tim Sweeney, Epic CEO, was on the case, and he made this statement on Twitter.
Sorry, the team is looking into this with IO. It's never Epic's intent to create a situation where someone who owns a game on Steam would have to buy it again on Epic Games Store to get the full benefits of it.
And then the following day, IO made this statement themselves.
We are continuing to work on a solution with our partners to allow PC players who own Hitman 1 or Hitman 2 to import locations from those games into Hitman 3 at no additional cost. We guarantee that players will not need to repurchase the games. Until we roll that out in the coming weeks, the Hitman Game of the Year Access Pass will be free to own for all PC players who pre-purchase or purchase Hitman 3 in the first 10 days after release. We are so excited for you to enjoy the full World of Assassination experience.
So there you go, the guarantee by IO there. So everything is apparently sorted, mostly, I would say. Some players might not be able to get access to Hitman 2 levels at launch, it seems, but they will in the quotes coming weeks. So I think that overall this was a bit of a slip up by IO, and I don't think there's really a different way to call this. But overall, I love IO as a studio, I really do. They split away from Square Enix, they took the Hitman franchise, and how they've turned it around is just so incredibly impressive. I've never played any of the reboots, but it's probably one of the games that I've never played that I think that I would enjoy the most, if that sentence makes sense.
Yeah.
But given this option to fans to carry on their progress through all the games, be able to play all the levels from the previous two games on the new game, is just really fucking cool, quite frankly. I really think that that's great. And yes, they seem to have fucked up a little bit around Hitman 2 here, but they noticed this fuck up and they've worked very hard, it seems, with Epic to get that turned around quickly before the launch of the game, crucially as well.
Yeah, fantastic stuff, I think, from IO Interactive. Like you say, it's not clear to me whether this is like IO's issue or Epic's, but yeah, it seems that it's all being resolved, and that in the fullness of time, maybe once people have had a little bit of time just with the Hitman 3 levels, that you'll be able to import the old games. And I mean, I hope that's a strategy that other studios and other publishers can use as well. It obviously depends on the game and if it's built in such a way that levels could just be imported in that way, but to be able to have 3 games worth of content within this one game, particularly now that people are going to be playing it on the new generation of consoles even, it's superb. It's so much bang for your buck there, and it's just IO Interactive, I think, having confidence in the products that they've made, but also knowing that people might be coming to this now, given all the hype around it, and not have played the old ones, and making it very easy to do that. I think that's so clever.
Oh, absolutely, man. Yeah, it's an absolutely great move by them. It's fantastic. I really, really like IO and what they're doing and their attitude towards games and giving their customers just incredible value for money, you know? And the VR as well, man. The VR looks absolutely fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
Like, it looks incredible. It's probably the best VR game I've seen apart from Half-Life Alyx. It looks absolutely sensational. The review embargo for the game has actually just lifted not long before we started recording, and it's currently sitting at an 84 on PS5, an 88 on Series X, and an 88 on PC as well. So pretty damn good scores there, I would say. I know that you're waiting on a copy to arrive, Lewis. I know that it's in the mail. But honestly, I think what IO has done with this series is just incredible, and it's got me very excited about what they could do with a James Bond game. More excited than I thought I could ever be about a James Bond game, just because I think that they are the perfect studio for that as well, you know?
Yeah, I mean, they've proven with this Hitman reboot that they absolutely know what they're doing with this type of game. They're thinking about how to put out games. You know, it started off episodic. They've trialed different things. Now here we are, the end of this kind of cycle of these games. They're about to embark on the Bond license, which is pretty mad. The whole thing, it's just a great story of a studio. I mean, it could have dissolved when Square decided to sell it up. It might have been the end of it all.
Absolutely.
And here they are. And like you say, yeah, I'm waiting on a copy coming just now. I'm really excited to be playing it. It's kind of the reason I've only been playing smaller games in the last couple of weeks, because I know this is coming and I'm excited to be playing it. I cannot wait to have a shot and see what it's all about.
Awesome, man. I love that. All right, news item number 4. Fortnite has joined together with top-tier football teams to allow you to buy and wear kits from 23 real-life clubs in-game. These clubs include Manchester City, Juventus, AC Milan, Inter Milan, Roma, Seattle Sounders, Atlanta United, Los Angeles, Santos, Wolverhampton Wanderers, West Ham United, Seville, Sporting, Borussia Mönchengladbach, Schalke, Wolfsburg, Lewis's team, the Glasgow Rangers, and my team, the Glasgow Celtic, are both there as well. Cesaro Osaka, Melbourne FC, Sydney FC, West Sydney Wanderers, and EC Bahai. I mean, that's pretty cool.
What a bizarre little news story.
Yeah, man, dearie me. They have also included a Pele air punch emote, and for a limited time they have made a football mode in the game as well. Details on how that is going to work do not exist yet. But Lewis, this is absolutely wild. Fortnite continues just to be whatever it wants to be. It started out as a tower defense game, then it was a battle royale, then it was a music venue, then it was an Avengers game, ? Now it's FIFA. I don't know. Has there ever been a game that has been so ubiquitously taken on by the mainstream? I'm not sure that there ever has. It's crazy what this game continues to do.
Yeah, not in this kind of way. Like, as you're explaining there, the breadth of coverage that Fortnite has in terms of mainstream, you know, not just mainstream culture, but now sport. It's just this thing, this absolute totemic cultural product which is drawing everything into it. It's like when it had the black hole, you know, literally all of reality could end up in Fortnite at some point. It's crazy. I mean, to be honest though, this is one thing that I never really imagined coming, because you could see them bringing in all these different, particularly kind of nerd culture fan-based things.
Oh yeah, totally, yeah.
That totally makes sense, but football doesn't necessarily fit there. And it was funny seeing, I checked out both Celtic and Rangers Twitter feeds when they were announcing this, and like older fans are like, what the fuck is this? Why are we doing this? And younger fans are obviously really excited about it. And that just shows you exactly why clubs and Fortnite are doing it, you know?
Yeah, it's absolutely wild. And say what you will about Fortnite, I'm not Fortnite's biggest fan either in terms of its actual gameplay mechanics. I do not like battle royales in general. Fortnite was probably my least favourite battle royale game that I've ever played, to be completely honest with you. But what it continues to do to serve its fans and to remain relevant, and as I said, like to continue to like penetrate into the mainstream is incredible. Like, it is so gargantuan even beyond video games now. Alright, finishing off with a couple of shout-outs. Shout-out number 1. New Pokemon Snap has finally got a release date, Lewis. This game is coming out on April the 30th and contains more than 200 Pokemon for you to take pictures of. The new world is called Lentil, as in lentil, which I just think is a ridiculous name. So that is something for everyone to look forward to on Switch, which, as we know, has been going through a bit of a drought recently. I know that this game has loads of fans as well. I'm not one of them, I've got to say. I do enjoy a Pokemon game as much as the next guy, but Pokemon Snap was never my jam. But I am very glad for the fans of this game that have got a sequel amazingly after 20 years. Absolutely amazing. Alright, shout out number 2. Riders Republic, Ubisoft's MMO extreme sports racing game, has been delayed until later this year. Ubisoft have made this statement over on Twitter.
Hey Riders, in September we gave you a first look at our massive multiplayer playground in Riders Republic. We promised an action-packed outdoor sports park filled with all-out mass races with more than 50 fellow riders on next-gen consoles, a variety of diverse activities and insane stunts. We can't wait to have you traverse our vibrant world and live out your own Riders fantasy. Today we want to let you know that we have made the decision to move our release to later this year. This additional time will allow our passionate team to deliver the best fun-fueled experience to our players. Thank you so much for your support and understanding. Stay safe and get ready to join the madness of Riders Republic soon.
So this game was announced back in September at a Ubisoft Forward event, and back then I was highly sceptical about this game, I've got to admit. I wasn't really sure about the audience, I wasn't really sure about who it was appealing to, but you sort of defended it a little bit.
I did, yeah. It's, just to clarify, it's not necessarily something that I envisage myself playing. I'm not particularly interested in extreme sports or really all that many sports that aren't football, but I think that there is a potential audience for this. Just look at like the popularity of the Tony Hawk's games, look at the constant clamour for new games in that ilk. That's skating, absolutely, and that's a kind of different subculture, but I think given that this seems to be bringing in a whole load of different extreme sports, I think people will want to try it out. Basically, I think if they nail the feeling of it being a bit like Fall Guys, a bit chaotic, stuff happening everywhere and good fun to play, I think it could land. But if they try and make it a really serious kind of like esports thing or something, then no, probably not.
Yeah, and I think that they're doing the right thing here as well, because this game has to have a good start, do you know what I mean? And for service games that is very, very difficult, so if they need to delay it, that is definitely the way to go.
Absolutely, yep.
Alright, shout out number 3. The Harry Potter RPG Hogwarts Legacy has been delayed from 2021 to 2022. WB have made this statement over on Twitter.
We would like to thank fans from around the world on the tremendous reaction to the announcement of Hogwarts Legacy from our Portkey Games label. Creating the best possible experience for all of the wizarding world and gaming fans is paramount to us, so we are giving the game the time it needs. Hogwarts Legacy will be released in 2022.
Now, obviously, Harry Potter, or specifically J.K. Rowling, hasn't had the best year in terms of her public image and has accumulated a fairly toxic atmosphere around about her. I think that is fair to say, Lewis.
Yep, absolutely.
Assuming that J.K. Rowling does a lot of shutting the fuck up, do you think that this delay might be a blessing in disguise for this game for PR reasons?
I think possibly, yeah. Specifically, if it was intending to release anytime soon in 2021, then yes, 100%. I don't think that it's very likely that that issue and J.K. Rowling's transphobic statements are going to stop anytime soon, though. So I can imagine Portkey Games having to delay again or simply having to bite the bullet, and I can totally envisage them including some sort of pro-everyone message within the game just to try and distance themselves from her personal politics.
Yeah, obviously J.K. Rowling will not have hands-on with this game, shall we say. She won't be a hands-on consultant or anything like that, but she will absolutely have a say in this game, categorically, and for WB to be using the Harry Potter name, she will be getting royalties from it as well. Alright, shout out number 4, Lewis. The CEO of PUBG's parent company, Krafton, has suggested that there could be not one but 2 new PUBG games this year.
That's right, yeah. So Kim Jang-han, who is the CEO, was speaking to Bloomberg and kind of outlined Krafton's plans to release a new mobile game this year that will be based on PUBG, as well as another PUBG-related PC and console game, quotes, by next year, which presumably means this year. And so both of those games coming out within this extended PUBG universe. And that also comes on the back of us knowing that the Callisto Protocol, which is a survival horror game, announced back at the Game Awards and shown off with a really incredible trailer.
Incredible trailer. This is by the Dead Space devs.
It is indeed, yeah.
I did not realise this was in the PUBG universe either, because it looks fuck all like PUBG.
Yeah. Well, so this Strike and Distance Studios, led by Glenn Schofield, who was involved in Dead Space, they were created, it seems to me, by PUBG Corporation, but I think that the Callisto Protocol was an existing idea of his that has now been kind of fitted into the far-flung future of the PUBG universe. I mean, I'm really not particularly interested in PUBG, I should say, but really excited when games companies take IP like that and kind of try and expand it and look at different genres and different types of games that they could make in that world. Of course, those two new PUBG games could just be PUBG Mobile 2 and PUBG Console 2. But even the notion of a sequel to a Battle Royale game, I think, is really interesting because we're not really there yet. We haven't really seen that yet. And it'll be curious to see what that would be beyond just more maps and more of the features that those games have now from the start, you know?
I must admit, Lewis, I sort of agree with you entirely there, I have to say. It's not something that I will be particularly interested in, I have to say, unless it's going to be something that's a bit of a departure from what PUBG currently is as we know it. But with the Callisto Protocol, we can see that they are willing to do that.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that in and of itself is interesting. So yeah, definitely interested to see where this lands, you know. All right, Lewis, and with that, I think it is time for a beer, and then we'll be back with Topic of the Week. And we are back for Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is Star Wars, Lucasfilm and licensed games, Lewis.
It is indeed, Mark, yeah, a triple-barreled title. And we just couldn't resist talking more about Star Wars this week on the back of this exciting news that EA's empire is over and there's now going to be this new Galactic Republic of games across different studios.
Oh, you've got to be proud of that.
I've been working on it.
Lovely, lovely little sentence there.
But I also wanted to kind of expand that out and talk just a bit about kind of licensed games generally in this Lucasfilm games revival, because I think it's thrown up some interesting conversation pieces, and most notably I think around kind of what the point of licensed games are and what they do to the industry. So we've obviously sort of recently seen quite a blitz of licensed games being announced, from the IO Interactive James Bond game that we've already mentioned, the Indiana Jones game that Machine Games is making, Ubisoft's Star Wars game just announced. Obviously in the last few months as well, we've seen a new Spider-Man game, an Avengers game, there's been new DC and Batman projects announced, you know, licensed games.
Jesus, man, I've not even thought about that.
Yeah, there's a lot going on just now in terms of licensed games, and there's kind of obvious reasons for that. They're exciting, they're instantly imaginable. They put, you know, as soon as you hear what one is, you can start to put the different pieces together and see what that game might be like, and they've obviously got a ready-made audience because they're already huge, and in these cases in particular, huge franchises with huge fan bases. Yeah. And I really don't think that there's anything wrong with getting excited about licensed games. I think because of the history of licensed games, people look at them sometimes as being kind of cheap, kind of cash-ins, essentially. I think in recent years, that's been proven, as we've talked about a bit before, to not necessarily be the case when license holders go off in interesting directions. You know, thinking about something like the Shadow of Mordor game, when that came out, that felt like it took the license, did something interesting with it. Less so with what, you know, EA's been doing with Star Wars recently. And when you get those pairings just right between a developer and a franchise or a series, it can be, you know, just really exciting, I think, for players. But Mark, I wanted to start this discussion by talking about this wee flurry and what we think about it. Kotaku published an article this week that I found really interesting, headlined, "Big Game Publishers Are Retreating into the Safety of Hollywood's Back Catalogue." And of course, we'll link that article in the show notes over on PlayersToo.com. And I just think that's a really interesting idea and a slightly alarming thing, because like right now gaming has basically never been bigger, right? It's a colossal money-making enterprise.
Absolutely.
It dwarfs all the other fields that these things come out in, right? And yet, despite that, are we seeing that companies are less willing to invest in new ideas or new stories or new mechanics? Maybe especially in that AAA space. And so I wanted to just pose that question to you first before we get into the kind of more exciting stuff. Should we be at all worried about this little flurry of franchise games? Is there a dearth of good ideas at the top of the industry?
I think worried is a bit strong.
Mm-hmm.
However, I do understand the point that is being made by the Kotaku article 100%. Are we seeing companies less willing to take risks on new IP? Yes. Categorically. Absolutely, yes. And we're seeing that in film as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
You ever wonder why everything's always a sequel or it's based on a comic book or a book? It's because nobody wants to take a risk, because the film industry is quite fragile at the top in reality, and we're continuing to see video games sort of move in quite a similar direction, which is why a company would much rather bring out a sequel than a new IP. A new IP is risky, a sequel is not. and at the same time, licensed IP that is instantly identifiable, particularly when we're talking about huge titles here. Do you know what I mean? Star Wars, James Bond, Batman, Spider-Man. I mean, there are a few better recognised characters in the world, fictional or otherwise, you know?
Yeah.
It's not that I think that there's a dearth of ideas. I'm sure that there is 1,000 amazing AAA games that are never going to get made. It's just about getting them over that bureaucratical finish line to convince someone that your new IP is worth it over going for a sequel or something like that, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's so at the heart of it, because it's all about that gamble of the money. And do you put the money into something that's got the Star Wars name in it and that is immediately going to recoup X amount of your development costs, or take a risk on something totally fresh? That's obviously the publisher side, right? But the dev side, just looking specifically at the Indiana Jones game and that Bond game, we're seeing a team that worked on the Wolfenstein games that you and I have loved, and we're also seeing IO Interactive, who've been working on this amazing reboot of the Hitman series, now transitioning to doing things within already established worlds, established stories, and also maybe things that don't have a massive appeal to people who aren't already deeply kind of invested in them. Like, if you're not already an Indiana Jones fan, you might not be super excited about an Indiana Jones game, you know, whereas the fact that they can make brilliant games shines out in whatever they're doing. Is that an issue at all to you, removing the publisher money side of it? Are you at all concerned to see good studios maybe making less ambitious projects?
Again, I think concerned is a bit of a strong word. Would I rather that Machine Games made Wolfenstein 3 rather than Indiana Jones? Absolutely, absolutely. But I think it is well within their capabilities to be working on both at the same time, or maybe we just have to wait a little bit longer to see that Wolfenstein game if the Indiana Jones game is what is going to come first. I understand what you're getting at in terms of the devs' time could be better spent. That's sort of what you're trying to get at here. It could be used realising their own ideas in the video game space rather than taking something that isn't the video game space and turn that into something that gamers want to play. Yeah, I do understand that, but ultimately you do have to think of this as a business in a lot of senses when it comes down to this sort of stuff. So I can see why a lot of those devs as well would be really excited to be working with an IP like Indiana Jones or like Star Wars or Bond or even Harry Potter. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm sure that there will be a lot of people that are really, really excited by that prospect. So it sort of swings and roundabouts, you know what I mean? I'm sure that there are devs there that are like, oh, I'm absolutely gutted about this. I don't want to be working with a licensed IP. I want to be totally creative and don't have to have all this oversight from Disney or WB or whoever, do you know what I mean, on my stuff. Like, I want to be far freer than that. And then there'll be some people in there going, oh my God, I get to contribute to the Star Wars universe. This is the greatest thing in the world, you know?
Yeah, it can't be overstated how many devs must just absolutely love to be working on Star Wars. And I think what you've just said there is kind of bang on, really, in terms of this debate that some of those people will leave that studio and they'll go off and form their own indie team because they don't want to do that kind of game. And we've seen that time and again, and that's led to some of our favourite games and some of the best games made in the last few decades. But I do think that the other thing that licensed games in particular can do is put new talent in the limelight. And I think like Rocksteady are a perfect example of that, because Rocksteady weren't really anyone before they started making the Arkham games, and now people are waiting with bated breath for any news about anything that they're doing, you know?
Absolutely, man. Yeah, definitely.
So I think that there's something there about IPs being given to the right teams at the right time and them using it as a springboard. And honestly, within franchises that are available, I cannot think of many better examples for that than Star Wars. Star Wars is so broad, it allows so much, and the fact that now that is open to so many more studios to make games within, I think you could start to see some really interesting, exciting stuff, both at the absolute top end AAA Ubisoft open world side, but also much lower down on the indie scale. And when you think about like Mike Bithell making a John Wick game, are we going to start to see Star Wars at that kind of level? I think that could be really cool.
That would be amazing, man. I have to say, so we're kind of ramping into our proposals for Star Wars games here, aren't we?
I think we are, Mark.
This is what we're ramping towards. We are both chomping at the bit to tell you what we think would be an amazing Star Wars game. But one of the lines I've written down here in my notes is a Star Wars game by literally any indie dev. So do you think that that is a real possibility?
I mean, who can tell? Because it's very possible that Disney and Lucasfilm will just go, Star Wars is above that and we don't need to do it. But I think that they would be missing a trick, because a lot of the ideas that I've been thinking about today around this topic have been like, what could a smaller team do that would just change what you think of as a Star Wars game, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. Another thing that I've written down as well is a Star Wars game with a cool art style that isn't just the typical look of Star Wars, you know?
Fairly realistic.
It's just something that could be done quite creatively and quite differently, and even if it was just like fucking cel-shaded, like if it was cel-shaded Star Wars, like that in and of itself I think would be nearly a revolution, you know?
So, do you want to give us some of your ideas for what would make a good Star Wars game? And if you've thought about it, what studio might make that?
Well, the first one, and probably the easiest one to come out with, quite frankly, I'm perfectly willing to say that, is an RPG Star Wars game. Now, there have been many RPG Star Wars games, so this perhaps isn't revolutionary. But I would love to see, in the Star Wars universe, where the Force is a thing and whatever, either set in the far past or the far future. So we're just totally removing all that Skywalker shit. Like, that is thousands of years ago. That's thousands and thousands of years ago, or thousands of years ahead. And the way that I was thinking about this as well would be that it would be in the far past, and it would be someone for the first time discovering the Force. So I've even thought about this narratively as well.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that it would be sort of Fallout-esque RPG in the vein of like Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, where your actions within the game, the decisions you make, how you build your character would decide what abilities you would unlock and things like that, and whether or not you were aligning to the light side or the dark side, which I think is a relatively video gamey thing.
Absolutely,
but I think that could work really well, particularly if it was done by Obsidian.
Of course.
So I think that would be awesome. Personally, I would totally play that game. The main thing about it, I think, is that just removing it from the Star Wars saga, do you know what I mean? That you have built this incredible universe, and you've only focused on a tiny little blip in it. Do you know what I mean? You've only focused on the actions of the Skywalkers and the Palpatines and all that shit that we've seen for years and years and years and years and years now. Right, what else has happened in this universe? That's something that I would be excited to see, you know?
Absolutely. Honestly, Mark, I think that is the direction that this is all going to go in reality, because I think we've seen with The Mandalorian on TV and the various projects that they've kind of announced around and spawning out of that that is what Disney are intending to do with Star Wars, is explore all of the kind of areas around the stories that have already been told. But on that, one thing that I would quite like to see in terms of a Star Wars game is sort of a similar idea of stripping out what we know. And I think it's quite easy, and we'll obviously touch on a few now, it's quite easy to think of Star Wars games as only being either a lightsaber game, a shooting game, or some sort of flying or racing game, you know? And I would really like to see something more in the vein of a narrative-driven walking sim, or something along the lines of the Telltale games or Don't Nods games. I mean, I am partly thinking about this having just been playing Tell Me Why, but Star Wars is so rich in its story and in the wider story of its universe. Like, as you say, you can go back in time, you can go forward in time, there's potentially limitless possibilities there. And it's also a universe that's full of politics, religion, effectively, intrigue. There's so much happening there. And I was just thinking about something maybe like a droid sent to investigate a downed ship and put together what happened, sort of along the lines of like Return of the Obra Dinn or Gone Home. A studio like Fulbright making something there that tapped into the lore with the objects and stuff that you could find, and that was just telling a story of something that happened in this world. Or, you know, something set in the kind of like scheming political world that we got little hints of in the films, but that haven't really been expanded on anywhere. I just think there's so much story in Star Wars, and that's what a lot of people come back to it for time and again, and that could be explored really interestingly.
I think that would be amazing, man. See if you had an Obra Dinn-esque sort of investigating thing around like a downed starship. That would be fucking incredible.
Yeah.
Another one of mine, Lewis, and I'm going to give you 2 for 1 here.
Nice.
Is either a XCOM Chimera Squad style game, obviously turn-based strategy, or a JRPG turn-based styled game. And my thinking around this is that you would be like a band of 4 stormtroopers, because there's always 4 in your party, that's how it works, sent on some mission by the Empire to go and do a thing, and it's just about your journey as this like band of stormtroopers. And maybe throughout the journey you sort of decide, oh, maybe listening to these fascist dictator people isn't the best thing to be doing, you know? But at any point where you got into combat or anything like that, it would sort of flick to a turn-based combat if it was like JRPG, or you would just be given mission by missions. It would be like, get from here to here or infiltrate this place for this reason, and your choices about what you did in an arena like that, if it were more of a Chimera Squad-esque game or an XCOM-esque game, would matter to how you were perceived. Do you know what I mean? Like whether or not you were more aligning with, yeah, this empire is great, destroy all the things, or you're more questioning the morality of what you're doing, you know? And I think that the perfect people to make an XCOM style game would be the people who made XCOM, who is Firaxis, who are an incredible studio. And if you're going JRPG, got to be Square Enix, doesn't it? I mean, they make all the JRPGs.
Fair enough, yeah. I definitely had an XCOM style game near the top of my list. I would genuinely love that. I mean, it seems so obvious and easy to do as well.
Totally, yeah. To be honest with you, if there hasn't been a turn-based strategy game like that in the Star Wars universe, at some point, I would be shocked.
There must have been. I was also thinking about Into the Breach by Subset Games, just taking it onto that kind of slightly smaller level, which could then even be embedded within a bigger game. You know, you could imagine having those types of strategic battles be something that you do as a commander in a much bigger game of some other description, you know? Yeah, it would just work so well. One other one for me, thinking a little bit about open worlds, but different to where I suspect Ubisoft are going to go with theirs, is a racing game, Mark, in the vein of Burnout Paradise.
Fuck yes.
Now that could be, and this
You've
might
said
be
all the right words there, Liz.
it might be too technically demanding, but can you imagine, Mark, a Star Wars racing type game set in one universe, one solar system, so to speak? So you might have, say, 10 planets and some moons and blah blah blah. And you could go between doing races in space in, you know, TIE fighters or even in bigger ship or the Millennium Falcon around the actual galaxy, but you could also come and land on planets and then do things that are closer to the pod racing that people absolutely loved from the Phantom Menace game way back when.
Yeah. Probably the best thing to come out of the prequels, that.
Pretty much, yeah. There's something there to just say, like, you can explore this. You know, there could be so much more built into it, but just a big open kind of universe that isn't about shooting people, and it's not about the grand political narrative of Star Wars, but that's just going like, go and explore these worlds, race people, upgrade your ship, do stuff like that, you know. So it's not a dogfighting game like Squadrons, it's not a straight up racer like the pod racing games were, but it's somewhere in between. I just think that could be so cool.
That is cool, man. I like that a lot. And can I get one more just before we finish?
Let's do it, yeah.
Okay, so I was thinking more about Stormtroopers because, let's face it, Stormtroopers and the Empire are by far the most interesting part of the Star Wars universe. Stormtrooper training in the vein of Fire Emblem Three Houses,
nice,
I think would be really cool. So you were at Stormtrooper training school for whatever reason. I'm sure you would have some tragic backstory for being there. And there would be a sort of training component to it, or the school portion in Fire Emblem Three Houses, where you'd be in your barracks doing whatever you were doing, trying to be like the best Stormtrooper. And then you would also be getting sent out on missions by the head of the barracks to do various things. And I'm thinking that like Fire Emblem Three Houses, it would have like a big cast, it would have permadeath and things like that. The battle system would be similar, but obviously it would all be like Star Wars shit rather than fantasy RPG stuff. The more I thought about that game, the more I was like, why has no one made this? This would be amazing. I would play this in a heartbeat. But I think what our conversation here is proving is that there is 1,001 things that you could do in the Star Wars universe. I just hope that Disney allow these dev studios to take the property in an interesting direction and not just make another Star Wars game the way that we know them now. Do you know what I mean? I hope that they have the balls, quite frankly, just to hand over the Star Wars property and just say, do something cool with us, you know?
And yeah, just invite pitches from developers. Just say to the whole development community, tell us what you want to make, convince us that it's going to do well or that it's going to be interesting and add something to this IP, and we'll back it. I just think all of this shows that licensed games more generally as well can be super interesting. They don't have to be what you just imagine that they're going to be all the time. There's so many ways that bigger franchises could be spun, and hopefully with a Star Wars change in terms of EA's deal, we're going to see that with Star Wars at least.
Well, let's hope so, Lewis. Let's hope so. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll have to call it a day there. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerSToo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts, it really, really, really helps us out. I know I say this twice a week, every week, but it does not become less important on a weekly basis. And while you're over there as well, if you could just leave us a review, again, it just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. You are an absolute legend to us. I'd like to remind everyone that our play-along game for this month is Unfinished Swan. It is not a very long game, and it may surprise you how good it actually is. It certainly did for me, so no excuse not to play along. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.